What do you think of when you think of the due process? Do you associate it with certain amendments or part of a constitution or maybe even the court system? When you think of the due process, do you think of it as a personal virtue, something necessary in our lives as we build moral architecture in our own life and we influence the lives of people around us? I really want us to think of the due process as something which is so important, where we don't just rush to judgments about people and issue out verdicts of guilt or innocence based on what a mob or something around us may tell us, but we actually use critical thinking to examine the evidence in the world around us. And I'm just going to open up this conversation with Amanda and Anthony and ask you all, what do you think of when you think of the due process?
Well, I think initially, the kind of initial, shortcut in my brain is to some kind of court system, some kind of Law and Order CSI episode of finding evidence, presenting it before a body of judges and jurors, and then getting the result. I think also the reason why this language is so difficult for us to take personally is because often we have looked at the due process in our government systems and said that they have failed. And so because they have failed, whether they have made, given a guilty verdict to an innocent person or a guilty person has gone free or whatever the circumstances, we've kind of then said, okay, well then due process has failed as a system, therefore I personally do not have to participate individually or collectively in that kind of process. And so of course we see the pathology of this, the great destruction that it brings when we either as an individual or as part of a community decide we don't have to evaluate something and we don't have to try to research and find the information in order to come to a conclusion. We kind of can just feel it out because maybe our feelings, our gut instinct might be more right than this corrupt system.
Okay. Anthony, what do you think?
I will say that before I probably would have agreed that whenever I heard due process, I think of legislature and a court system and things like that. But, we've talked about this before about the due process in, I guess, social interactions, whenever you receive information from someone else and most of the time about someone else. And so, now I really, really like it because a lot of people do understand that due process is something that we should hold as a common virtue between human beings. Yeah. And I like it. I like the language a lot because it can communicate the idea that, we're not supposed to, we should judge sparingly, I guess, and only whenever we know for sure that this is a correct judgment to make. And so, I like the language of it a lot because you can tell someone to, maintain due process in this situation. And a lot of times it will kind of set them back and disarm them because they're not used to hearing it used that way. Yeah. But they can see how it completely applies. Well, we see. So that's why I like it.
So many areas in our world, especially with the coming of social media, that people do not have the virtue of due process. Somebody posts something online, they immediately believe it's true. It's really infected a lot of our social levels, and especially for young people who are starting to mature, they're starting to come out of adolescence and become an adult. They don't really have this idea of waiting for evidence. Don't just believe everything your friends or people online post. Wait and withhold judgment till you know more about a situation. Again, I think it's so interesting. We've got Facebook and the other forms of social media, Twitter, whatever have you. And a lot of the people who were involved early in this, of course, is the guy who was big and important in Facebook. And he's come out and said, actually, the evidence is in Facebook is terrible for people. It's tearing apart the fabric of society because we no longer really have the ability to have social interactions that are more of a negotiation, and we hear different arguments. We basically find echo chambers to be in, and we sort of stick there. And for young people, they're not taught as individuals to hear both sides of an argument. And this is not even just with political or moral issues. This is just with even like high school things. When people are dealing with bully situations, they don't hear multiple angles of things, and they have all these rush to judgments, whether it be something bad or something good. And you get all these emotional highs and emotional lows, and it just stratospheres across the emotional spectrum in a crazy way that is just absolutely absurd. We as the church, we need to teach people the importance of the due process. And it's interesting, Jesus, when he goes to the cross, the mob that takes Jesus to the cross really wants to circumvent both the Jewish system's due process and the Roman system as well. There's a mob that says, we don't like that there's no evidence against Jesus, but we want him dead anyway. It's basically what happens. But this isn't the first time that happens in the Gospels. Actually, there's an interesting passage in John chapter 7 that I'd like for us to read. And Amanda, if I could ask you, could you read John chapter 7, verses 40 through 52?
All right. So it says that when they heard these words, some of the people said, "This really is the prophet." Others said, "This is the Christ." But some said, "Is the Christ to come from Galilee? Has not the scripture said that the Christ comes from the offspring of David and comes from Bethlehem, the village where David was?" So there was some division among the people over him. Some of them wanted to arrest him, but no one laid hands on him. The officers then came to the chief priests and to the Pharisees, who said to him, "Why did you not bring him?" The officers said, "No one ever spoke like this man." The Pharisees answered them, "Have you also been deceived? Have any of the authorities or the Pharisees believed in him? But this crowd that does not know the law is accursed." Nicodemus, who had gone to him before, and who was one of them, said to them, "Does our law judge a man without first giving him a hearing and learning what he does?" They replied, "Are you from Galilee too? Search and see that no prophet arises from Galilee."
All right, this is fantastic on so many levels. So many people in our modern day and age want to say, oh, a document written in the 18th century is irrelevant in our modern culture. They say, oh, the Bible, it's outdated. There's no value in it. It's a 2,000 plus year old document. It's completely worthless. That's a very lazy and foolish argument to make, because a lot of these same things are recycled time and time again. Basically what happens in the midst of this is there is a group of religious leaders in the Jewish community who want to pass judgment on Jesus just because they do not like him. There's one among them, a Pharisee named Nicodemus. We just did a video talking about Nicodemus in Hot, Not, or Sanctified. Nicodemus comes to the situation and says, hey, wait up. Before we just pass judgment, is it really right for us to pass judgment without even giving this man a hearing? Now, of course, Nicodemus is eventually understood to be a follower of Jesus, but even at this moment, we see him siding with Jesus and saying, look, legally, we should at least give the man a hearing. So many times in our culture, people say, this is what I want emotionally, and I don't care about the legality of it. What do y'all think when y'all see Nicodemus here saying, we really need to have due process? What do y'all think about this?
Well, I think he really does become kind of the lone voice amidst of the mob. He's the one that's trying to tether them back. And I love their response. Are you from Galilee too? Because isn't that just fantastic? Is we hate this guy from Galilee, and so everyone that kind of gets in our way, we're just going to put you in that little box that no one wants to be from this town. No one wants to fit this category. So we're going to put you there too, regardless if you are or not, just so we can discredit you. And it's fantastic. And still Nicodemus, again, he's the one that's searching out righteousness. He's trying to find, he wants to live up to what the law really means, not just the emotional knee-jerk reaction, not just the fear of losing power or authority, because Jesus is proclaiming this fantastic message of this upside-down kingdom that regardless of all these circumstances happening, Nicodemus is the one that says, let's find out the truth. And really he's the only voice, right? He's the only one that seems to be trying to do this, because everyone else, whether it is the religious leaders or the crowd that later becomes the mob, or even Jesus's disciples, don't really seem to quite understand what's going on, to really investigate what's happening. Nicodemus is still the one that says, wait a second, let's get all the facts together first. And I think he remains that lone voice even 2,000 years later.
Yeah, and you look at this, very much true, Amanda. Anthony, what are your thoughts on this?
I think, well, we don't know for sure, I suppose, with absolute certainty, because, the absence of proof isn't the proof of absence. But, there's nothing to indicate that Nicodemus was given some sort of prophecy or any word of God or anything like that, telling him that this was going to be the Messiah who was coming and, all this other. And I think, it's so interesting to me that he really is kind of like walking in blind here. He knows enough to where he's like, I can't just throw judgment on this. But he doesn't know for sure that that Jesus is, in fact, who people claim that he is, and things like that.
Yeah.
But, he's not allowing that to change his virtues, and the things that he believes in. And, he, as well as the Pharisees say that they believe, the rest of the Pharisees, he believes that, that they should indeed at least convict someone who's guilty.
Yeah.
They shouldn't be convicting people who aren't guilty. He's sitting there like, could we at least prove this, please?
He is trying to tame the mob some too, saying at least the mob shouldn't be angry without at least hearing.
Yeah.
But there's a couple of things we see here. And of course, Nicodemus does meet with Jesus in chapter 3, so he's had at least one personal experience with Jesus. But Nicodemus comes into this situation, and they use some arguments people use today. They say, oh, well, from Galilee? You people are from Galilee? Nothing good comes from Galilee. Well, that's not an argument. Then they have the other side of this. They say, search, go look in the record, see if a prophet has ever come from Galilee. Again, that's not an argument that Jesus is not a prophet or a Messiah. Just because where he came from doesn't mean that. They've already established that he's of the lineage of David. They've already seen the whole Bethlehem thing, even within this text. But they're just looking for a reason to discredit the man because they don't like him. And that's what you get when you get people who don't respect the very core virtue of the due process. Well, anyways, we're going to wrap up our conversation on this. Send us your comments, your questions. Tell us what you think about it. Thanks for watching.